Hello, and welcome to the 11th episode of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is, where we talk about actresses who may have come close to earning Oscar nominations but were ultimately overlooked or omitted or for one reason or another just did not have the votes to make it into the final lineup, and discussing why they may have deserved to get in and why they ultimately didn't. Each episode has its own theme, presented as a double feature, and this week we are going to talk about two performances that earned nominations at the Golden Globes, Critics' Choice, SAG, and BAFTA, but did not get that Oscar nomination in the end. And joining me today to help me break down both of these great performances here is an old colleague of mine from Gold Derby, where he works as a contributing writer. Welcome back to the show, Luca Giliberti.
Hello, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on. And, like I told you, this is really the perfect episode to have me on. I'm just so excited to talk about these two actresses. So yeah, I'm really excited. I've never done something like this. So I'm really curious to see what we have to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I love both of these actresses, and was kind of shocked to see both of them miss out in the end in the respective seasons they had. So excited to explore how that happened with you. But let's get right into it. I presented to my patrons here at And the Runner-Up Is a list of 5 women who earned all the major precursor nominations but missed at the Oscars, asking them to vote on their 2 favorites. The choices were Marion Cotillard for Rust and Bone, Emma Thompson for Saving Mr. Banks, Lady Gaga for House of Gucci, Viola Davis for The Woman King, and our recent inductee into this club, Margot Robbie for Barbie. And the 2 top vote getters were Emma Thompson and Viola Davis. So those are the 2 who we'll be talking about today. Next closest was Lady Gaga, but it was very clear that these were the 2 choices that the patrons wanted. So before we discuss these performances and these 2 actresses, Luca, I just wanted to talk about this phenomenon we see almost every year at this point now, where someone gets all these precursor nominations. They seem like they have this widespread support. Then it seems like they're going to get that Oscar nomination at the end of this, but then they just miss out. And we're going to get into the specifics of why both of them missed here. But do you have any thoughts just on maybe the relationship between like precursors and Oscars and how people in our awards circle tend to kind of like talk about precursors like this?
Well, I think if we look at, these specific, not necessarily these 2 performances, but performances or actors that get all the precursor nominations and then miss the Oscar nomination, I think one of the most important differences to really acknowledge is that the Oscars have a very different voting system, right? We're dealing with the preferential ballot at the Oscars. And I think that is one of the main reasons we see so many people get every single precursor nomination and then end up missing the Oscar, because at the Oscar, if you do not have those number 1 votes, if you don't have, a ton of passion, it's going to be very difficult for you to get nominated. Whereas, at most of these precursors, it's just, who gets the most votes, who appears on the most ballots. So it's much easier for specific actors and specific performances to get in there as opposed to the Oscars. And I'm sort of surprised every year to see people. There's so many obvious cases, or I think in many cases they're obvious, where someone is going to get all the precursor nominations and is then going to miss. And for some reason, people still say that once you've gotten all the precursor nominations, you're basically locked for the Oscar nomination. I feel like at this point we kind of know better, and I think pundits know better. So it's kind of, don't you find it interesting to see that conversation happen every single year, where people all of a sudden are locked after they've received all the precursor nominations? And we know that there's so many other factors that play into it. So I find that to be kind of interesting.
Yeah. And it's always important to note that no one is a true lock, really.
Exactly.
There are obviously like clear, like 99% sure they're going to get in. Like if you're winning all the awards leading up to it anyway, then like, of course you're going to get an Oscar nomination. But yeah, when you have some of these lower tier quote unquote contenders that are in the 5 that aren't really winning things, there's always a danger.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's always really interesting to just see how different groups have different tastes.
Yeah.
And I do like when these awards groups have their own identity.
Yes, me too.
And the kinds of performances they tend to like. Yeah. And I think with the Golden Globes, you usually see star power, right?
Yes, exactly.
with SAG, you see taste that is very, I would say, very American.
Very American.
We'll say that.
Yeah.
You know, we just saw how Sandra Hüller didn't get a SAG nomination for Anatomy of a Fall, and everyone expected that to happen anyway, even though, like, she has one of the most acclaimed performances of the year.
Exactly.
But we just know that those SAG voters are not particularly keyed into, you know, non-English language performances. And BAFTA has its weird jury system now, which really complicates the nominations. Yeah. And then Critics' Choice, you know, they tend to go with whatever's highest on Gold Derby, if we're being completely honest.
Exactly.
So.
And I think that's one of the main reasons. I don't want to say it doesn't matter when you've received all the precursor nominations, but I think it's not that difficult to be nominated for all the precursors, if that makes sense. At the Golden Globes, if you're in a lead category, you have categories for comedy and drama. So there are already automatically more slots. We know that Critics' Choice loves to have more slots. There's really not a fixed number. They come up with different numbers every year, basically. I mean, usually it's a fixed 6, but we've seen it be 7 or even 8 in some years. But even there, you have or 10 or 10
other categories,
or 10 in other categories. So you have an additional slot there. And then at the BAFTAs, like you said, we have this jury system now, which kind of makes it very difficult to evaluate those results, because we know that as it currently stands, the top, the top 3 vote getters automatically get in. So that's always, we never know who the top 3 vote getters are, but we can, in the acting categories, but we can always kind of guess. So in that way, it is meaningful, but the other nominees are jury saves. So we have no idea whether they would have been nominated under a normal system. So it's kind of, I find it more and more difficult to really use the precursors as a barometer for the Oscars. And like you said, I kind of like that. I find that really interesting. I like it when awards go out of, or kind of do their own thing. And then for the SAG Awards, I think it also should be mentioned that, people like to kind of drag the SAG Awards a bit, or the SAG after voting body, because their taste is a bit more, in quotes, basic. But people have to remember that the nominations are selected by a nominating committee of around 2,500 people each year, a rotating nominating committee. And these people actually watch a lot of movies, a lot more than probably a lot of Academy voters do. And that's why I think we do see some inspired nominations at the SAG Awards, even if they love to disregard non-American performance.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so that's why when you have a performance that gets in everywhere, I think it does create this assumption that there is a consensus, right? But the key thing to remember, of course, like you said with the Oscars, is that passion is what really matters. And if a performance isn't showing up at number 1 on enough ballots, it just doesn't get in. It could be everyone's 4th or 5th choice, but the number 1 votes are everything. And that's what prevents certain contenders, like maybe the ones that we're talking about today, from making it in. Yeah. So, let's break down these 2 performances, shall we?
Yes, let's go.
Well, starting in chronological order, we're going to start first with Emma Thompson for Saving Mr. Banks.
This is the rest of your team. This is Dick and Bob Sherman, music and lyrics, voice, the one and only Mrs. P.L. Travers, the creator of our beloved Mary.
Poppins.
Who else?
Mary Poppins. Never, ever just Mary. Pleasure to meet you. Fear we shan't be acquainted for very long.
Why is that?
Because these books simply do not lend themselves to chirping and prancing. No, certainly not a musical. Now, where is Mr. Disney? I should so much like to get this started and finished as briskly as is humanly possible. Perhaps someone could point me in his direction. I'd be so grateful. Thank you.
Okay, so this episode is coming at a very convenient time for me on my show, because I've just finished her, discussing her great 90s run on the Best Actor series, from her win for Howard's End to her last acting nomination for Sense and Sensibility. I know I've said it over and over again, but it's so wild that Sense and Sensibility remains her most recent nomination at the Oscars. Wild. But yeah, so just to kind of track where Emma Thompson is between Sense and Sensibility and Saving Mr. Banks, which is like 20 years almost. She starts to branch out from those period pieces that the Oscars loved her for. She did The American President, which is a Hollywood production. She wins an Emmy for guest starring on Ellen. She worked with Mike Nichols on the TV movie Wit, which got her a lot of acclaim. She did Love Actually, which a lot of people love her in, including myself. Angels in America, more awards love there. She does quite a few supporting roles. She does things like Harry Potter, but she also is leading her own little franchise with Nanny McPhee, which has some interesting parallels, obviously, with Mary Poppins and the film we'll be talking about today. But point being, you know, she's really well liked, really well respected, and dabbling in bigger projects, smaller projects. And then when Saving Mr. Banks comes, it sort of feels like a true comeback to the kind of film prestige that a lot of people fell in love with her for. So the film centers on the making of Mary Poppins and Walt Disney's efforts to get the original author, P.L. Travers, a British woman who kind of turns up her nose when she arrives in Los Angeles to talk with Disney, to get her to sign away the rights to her stories. So ultimately, even though she doesn't really want to be doing this, she really needs the money. And we see how she works with the writers, the composers, and Walt himself, played by Tom Hanks, to get her to approve of their vision for this adaptation. And she constantly makes it difficult because she believes it should be only presented in a certain way. So let's get right to it. Tell me your thoughts overall on Emma Thompson, just her overall career, and your thoughts on this performance here.
Well, I mean, Emma Thompson, I adore her as most people do. I think she's such a versatile actress, and I find her career choices to just be so interesting. I mean, obviously this came out in 2013, but even the choices she's made since then have just been really interesting. And I kind of find it interesting, the role she's been taking on at this stage in her career. And I think her performance in Saving Mr. Banks kind of encapsulates everything that she's good at. And I think it's really interesting to sort of look at the two performances we're talking about today, because they're kind of, in my opinion, there's a lot of similarities between the two, because I think Emma Thompson's performance in Saving Mr. Banks is kind of like a masterclass in restraint, in holding back, and then like gradually revealing emotions throughout the movie. Because with P.L. Travers, obviously, she has this traumatic childhood that is explored in the movie. She had this alcoholic father, this father who kind of drove the family to financial hardship, that drove their mother kind of to the brink. And obviously she has these are very complicated feelings to deal with, because on the one hand, she really loves her father, but on the other hand, she kind of has to acknowledge that he also kind of put the family in a lot of trouble and caused her mother a lot of stress. So I think what you see in the movie is that she not only has to reckon with that duality, but she also harbors a lot of guilt for, one, not being there when her father died, and her father played by Colin Farrell, by the way, and number two, for not being able to save him. And what we learn is that she really tries to exorcise those demons by writing Mary Poppins, by, and I think by writing the story, I think she really hopes to kind of redeem her father and kind of save him in a way that she couldn't do. And in that way, I think she tries to help herself, forgive herself. And, what this kind of means is that she has all this unprocessed grief, all this unprocessed anger, all this unprocessed guilt bubbling inside her. And what she really does in the movie is she really puts her walls down so that no one can see all of these emotions that are kind of swirling on the inside. So what you see in Emma Thompson's performance is that on the surface, she is this very tense, unforgiving, and as we see quite often, kind of a rude person. But, below that surface, she's someone who feels everything very deeply. And she's not just an artist trying to protect her creative vision. She's also someone who's trying to protect her childhood memories, and kind of also the comfort that she created for herself in order to escape all those pains of regret and guilt and everything she's harbored throughout her life. And what I really love about Emma Thompson's performance is that she allows those emotions to bubble up, but not quite penetrate the surface throughout the entire movie. And then at the end, when we finally see her in the movie theater watching Mary Poppins, that's when all the emotions come pouring out. And I just think it is such a cathartic moment to watch. And it's obviously such a cathartic moment for P.L. Travers. And I think it's just such a well-rounded, in many ways, a really calculated performance. And I think that really works for this character. So I think it's an absolutely stunning performance.
I agree. Yeah. And in remembering this performance before I rewatched this, I kind of remembered it being like, yes, she's playing the prickly, difficult type of role, and she
Hmm.
does that very well.
Yeah.
I didn't remember thinking of it as particularly awards worthy necessarily, but watching it again, I actually was really impressed with her ability to find a lot of nuance in
Yes.
what could have been a very stock character type. And I actually think the film does a good job of treating her as not just she's the obstacle for Disney and his team, but is actually like trying to provide an emotional through line for PL Travers for
Exactly.
why this is so tough for her to agree to. And like you're saying, it all goes back to her childhood. We see those flashbacks with Colin Farrell playing her father. And I don't think those are particularly as effective as her just in the present
Hmm.
necessarily.
Hmm.
But I like how it shows her bluntness and her snobbiness, which was absolutely there. It's entirely rooted in truth. You know,
Exactly.
that's not really an exaggeration, while also showing the hurt person that's beneath that coldness. And I think
Mm.
Emma is just the perfect person to play this character. You know, she is a writer herself.
Yes.
And I've been talking a lot on the main show about like her ability to express emotion through these repressed characters. And this character is repressing a lot of pain.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I think it's fun to see her in this type of setting
Yes.
because how she's kind of able to very freely express her opinions,
Hmm.
unlike some of these other performances I've talked about in those, like, you know, Howard's End and Sense and Sensibility, like really restraining her opinion because of the nature of women at the time. It's, you know, it's its own different culture, but seeing her really get to show off her comedy skills, I think
Yes.
that's really clear here. But there is that emotional intelligence that I keep going back to with Emma, and how even with how tough this character is, she really humanizes her and shows like in those little face cracks at times and
Exactly.
those hints of
Yes. Yes.
vulnerability
Yes.
beneath
Yes.
all of that sort of bluntness.
And don't you love the scenes where her wall kind of goes up? Like I'm thinking about the scene
Yes.
where she's kind of, she's kind of loosening up and she's kind of enjoying herself, and then she finds out that the penguins are going to be animated in the movie. And then
Yeah.
immediately she sets right back down. She puts her walls right back down. And I kind of love those moments where where those emotions kind of shine through the cracks of that surface that we've been kind of talking about. And I really
Yeah.
love how she still waits, or I find she kind of still waits until the end of the movie to really pour out all of those emotions. And I really love
Hmm.
how she did that. And again, I feel like we'll be talking about that later on when we talk about the second performance. But I
Totally.
always think that's a really interesting artistic choice from an actor.
Yeah, I love it. In the beginning, like her kind of baffled reaction when she hears that Dick Van Dyke is playing Bert, and her struggling to even form words
Yeah.
is very, very funny, and insisting that like she is opposed to this by very loudly stating it for like the tape recording
Yeah.
that she insists on having. It's perfect. And like for as broad and obvious as some of the comedy is here, she's so in the pocket. She's so perfectly pitched as
Mm-hmm.
that very highly opinionated person
Mm-hmm.
who has a certain vision in her mind of what this has to be, how it should be adapted the right way. And I think to her credit, she again is living up to the prickly qualities of the character, but there is that underlying desperation to
Yes.
honor the memory of her father more
Yeah.
than anything else. That's her guiding light through all of this,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
And I mean, it's really tough to, because Mary Poppins is so personal to her, because the story is so personal to her. It's difficult to hand it over to someone else and to say, okay, I'll allow you to tell this story. So I feel
Yeah.
like that's something you can really, really relate to throughout the movie, is her
Mhm.
not wanting to let go. But and I think that's also why I really love that scene between her and Tom Hanks toward the end of the movie, where he basically says, "It'll be in safe hands. Don't worry. We will, protect your father's legacy." Basically, I think that's one of the
Right.
best scenes in the movie.
Thank you for listening to this preview of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.